Imagine waking up every morning, putting on your work clothes, and heading off to spend the next 8 hours inside a pile of human waste. No sick days, no air freshener, no resignation letter. Just you, a bucket, and the absolute worst smell your brain can imagine, times 1,000. That was Tuesday for a lot of people in medieval Europe. And today, we're going full deep dive into the grossest, weirdest, most unbelievably real jobs that actual humans did for money in the Middle Ages. Buckle up, it only gets worse from here. Welcome back. Today, we're talking medieval jobs, but not the cool ones. Not knights, not kings, not wizards. We're talking about the people at the very, very bottom of the job market, the ones society desperately needed and desperately pretended didn't exist. We've got 8 jobs lined up, and every single one will make your current job feel like a 5-star vacation. Let's get into it. Job number 1, the gong farmer. And no, this has nothing to do with music. Gong was the medieval English word for human excrement. So a gong farmer was quite literally a person who climbed into the cesspits beneath castles and manor houses and scooped out everything people had been depositing in there for months, by hand, with shovels, in the dark, at night, because they were only allowed to work after midnight, so nobody had to see or smell them doing it. The waste could pile up to 15 feet deep. That's like swimming in a pool, except the pool is entirely made of medieval poop. They carried it out in buckets, loaded it onto carts, and hauled it outside the city walls. They were paid pretty well for the time, actually, which tells you everything you need to know about how badly someone had to not want this job before they'd consider doing it themselves. Okay, let's talk about wool. In medieval times, wool was everything. Your blanket, your tunic, your socks, all wool. But raw wool straight off a sheep is stiff, greasy, and full of dirt and oils. Before it could be used, it had to be cleaned and thickened. That process was called fulling. And the way you did it? You stomped on it, in a giant tub, for hours. But here's the twist. You didn't use water to loosen up the fibers. You used urine, collected urine from the whole town, aged urine specifically, because fermented pee contains ammonia, which actually works as a cleaning agent. People would leave buckets outside their homes. The fuller would collect them every morning like the world's worst milk delivery route. Then they'd pour it all into the tub, throw in the wool, and just stomp around in it all day. Their feet were essentially marinating in a stranger's week-old bathroom habits. If you think your morning commute is rough, just remember, at least you're not doing leg day in a vat of community urine. This one sounds almost cool until you learn what it actually involved. Before modern medicine, barbers didn't just cut hair, they also performed surgery. Pulling teeth, amputating limbs, bloodletting, which is exactly what it sounds like, cutting people open on purpose to let blood drain out because medieval doctors thought that cured basically everything. Headache? Bleed it out. Fever? Bleed it out. Feeling a bit sad? Bleed it out. The barber surgeon's shop had a distinctive red and white striped pole outside, which wasn't decoration. The red represented blood. The white represented bandages. That's right, the candy cane pole outside your local barber shop, ancient symbol of amateur surgery performed on a wooden chair. These guys had zero formal medical training. They learned on the job. And their tools? Well, let's just say the survival rate was encouraging if you were being generous about it. This one might be the most unsettling job on this entire list, the sin eater. When someone died in rural Britain and parts of Europe, the family was worried, not just about grief, about the dead person's soul. What if they'd sinned too much? What if they couldn't get into heaven? Solution? Hire a sin eater. A poor person from the village, usually the poorest, most desperate person around, would be summoned to the body. Food and drink would be placed on the chest of the deceased. The sin eater would eat it. By consuming the food that had rested on the dead body, they were believed to literally absorb all the sins of the deceased. The dead person's soul was cleansed. The sin eater carried the moral weight forward. They were paid a few coins for this, and then, here's the kicker, they were shunned by the entire community immediately afterward. Everyone needed them, everyone called for them in a crisis, and then everyone avoided them like someone who just ate sin off a corpse. Imagine doing the world's most important job and getting paid in guilt and social exclusion. Sounds like a startup, honestly. Remember how we talked about bloodletting? Yeah, the barber surgeon needed supplies. Enter the leech collector. Medicinal leeches were in massive demand across medieval Europe. They were used to drain blood from patients in a more controlled way. Placed on the skin, they'd attach and feed until they were full, then drop off. But somebody had to catch them. Leech collectors would wade into muddy ponds, rivers, and marshes with their bare legs, sometimes wrapped in a bit of cloth, usually not, and just walk around slowly, waiting for leeches to latch on. That was the method. That was the whole strategy. Use yourself as bait. Once enough leeches had attached, they'd carefully peel them off, toss them in a jar, and do it again. A single collector might pull 50 to 100 leeches per session. And since leeches also carried whatever bacteria was living in that swamp water, leech collectors frequently got infections, fevers, and open wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. They were literally farming parasites with their own legs. And you thought your job didn't appreciate you. Okay, this one sounds like an upgrade at first. Royal food taster. You eat the king's food before he does, just to make sure it isn't poisoned. Free meals, palace access, probably nice clothes. Except, think about what the job description actually is. You eat food that might kill you every single day, multiple times a day. And if it is poisoned, you find out the hard way in real time in front of the entire royal court while everyone watches to see if you fall over. Poisoning was genuinely one of the most common ways medieval royals were assassinated. Kings had actual enemies, powerful, connected people who wanted them dead. And the food taster's entire value to the king was being expendable enough to take that risk first. You weren't important, you were a human smoke alarm. Some food tasters lasted years, some lasted weeks. And if the king was in a bad mood and you looked suspicious after eating a bread roll, that was also bad for you. There was essentially no safe day in this job. Every meal was a potential final meal. Fine dining has never sounded more stressful. Medieval warfare used a lot of arrows. A single English longbowman could fire up to 12 arrows per minute. Multiply that by hundreds of archers, multiply that by an hour-long battle, and you've got hundreds of thousands of arrows scattered across a field. Arrows were expensive, they couldn't just leave them there, so after the battle, someone had to go collect them. That someone walked onto a field that moments ago was covered in flying death, and now was covered in the aftermath of flying death. Bodies, blood, mud, and arrows sticking out of things you don't want to think about. The arrow retriever had to yank them out of the ground, out of shields, out of wooden barriers, and yes, sometimes out of the fallen soldiers themselves, all while the battle potentially wasn't even fully over on the other side of the field. They were paid per arrow recovered. Imagine being paid per arrow. Per arrow. Walking through the most horrifying scene imaginable, counting pointy sticks, because that's how your rent gets paid this month. Medieval economics was wild. And we saved the most iconic for last, the plague doctor. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 1300s, it didn't just kill people, it killed entire cities. Some regions lost half their population in weeks, and someone had to walk into that. Plague doctors were hired by towns, not hospitals, not kings, towns, to treat the sick during outbreaks. They wore what is now one of the most recognizable costumes in history: a long waxed coat, leather gloves, a wide-brimmed hat, and that beak, that long bird-shaped beak mask. It wasn't for style. The beak was stuffed with herbs, spices, and dried flowers because plague doctors believed bad air, called miasma, was what spread the disease. The aromatics were supposed to filter it out. They were essentially walking air fresheners in a city of death. Did it work? No, not even a little. But here's what makes this job uniquely terrifying. Plague doctors weren't exactly volunteers. Many were young, inexperienced, or just desperate for money. Actual qualified doctors often refused the job. Towns sometimes hired anyone willing to do it. So you'd have an undertrained man in a beak mask carrying a wooden cane to examine patients without touching them, walking through streets full of dying people with essentially no understanding of what was actually making them sick. And their treatment options? Lancing the buboes, the swollen, pus-filled lumps that appeared on plague victims, applying dead pigeons to the wounds, bloodletting, telling people to eat less or move. Genuinely, just move was a recommended treatment. The average plague doctor didn't last long. Many caught the plague themselves. The ones who survived multiple outbreaks were almost considered miracle workers, not because of their medicine, but because they somehow kept not dying. The beak mask became a symbol of death itself. In medieval carnival culture, the plague doctor character represented the one figure that showed up whether you wanted them or not. You couldn't bribe him, you couldn't ignore him, he just appeared, usually right before things got very, very bad. So there you have it. 8 real jobs, 8 real people, all of them doing things that would make your worst Monday morning feel like a tropical holiday. The gong farmer scooping poop at midnight, the fuller stomping through strangers' aged urine, the barber surgeon winging surgery with zero training, the sin eater carrying everyone's moral debt and getting zero respect for it, the leech collector literally using their own body as bait, the royal food taster eating toward potential death 3 times a day, the arrow retriever counting pointy sticks on a battlefield to pay rent, and the plague doctor walking straight into the worst outbreak in human history wearing a bird mask full of flowers. History isn't just kings and battles, it's also the person knee-deep in a cesspit at 2 a.m. so the castle doesn't overflow. And honestly, they deserve way more credit. Now here's your question for the comments. Which of these 8 jobs would you be most willing to do, and what's your price? Drop it below. I read every single one. If you made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit the button. New video dropping soon, and trust me, it gets weirder from here. See you in the next one.